So Poland just threatened Russia at the UN Security Council, essentially saying, if you fly another drone, missile, or aircraft into NATO airspace, you're going to regret it. Here we go.
I have only one request to the Russian government. If another missile or aircraft enters our space without permission, deliberately or by mistake, and gets shot down and the wreckage falls on NATO territory, please don't come here to whine about it. You have been warned. Thank you.
Now, these were statements made by the Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski at a special UN Security Council meeting today that Estonia called for after 3 Russian fighter jets violated Estonian airspace and stayed in Estonian airspace for 12 minutes before being escorted out last week by Italian F-35s. And we've got some additional statements from Poland, the European Union, Latvia, and Lithuania worth running through here. And across the board, we're seeing them draw this line and say enough is enough. Russia cannot do this anymore, and they're going to explain exactly what Russia is doing. And it's good. I like seeing that these countries, especially in Eastern Europe, are coming together facing the Russian aggression because, honestly, here in the U.S., we're kind of taking a different course, focusing on other priorities for the foreseeable future. But continuing with the Polish foreign minister, he looks at the members of the Security Council here and says, this wasn't a mistake in Russia. You know it. We know it. Everybody knows it. Here we go.
Mr. President, Excellencies, this Emergency Security Council meeting has been called because a mere week after Russia sent drones into Poland, 3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets with their transponders off entered Estonian airspace without authorization and lingered for 12 minutes. On the same day, 2 Russian fighter jets violated the security zone over the Polish drilling platform in our economic zone in the Baltic Sea. If these were accidents, why not immediately acknowledge them and apologize? We have given Russia a pass in the past in such circumstances. But we have not heard any apologies, only lies. Together with the intensification of attacks on Ukraine, they seem to be an eloquent comment on, quote, moving from confrontation to dialogue, end quote, promised by Vladimir Putin in Alaska. These breaches of airspace are suspect because they are an escalation of hybrid war which Russia has waged against the West for years. Murders of politicians, journalists, human rights defenders and defectors, cyber attacks against hospitals and financial institutions, arsons, including in Poland, UK and Lithuania, postal packages containing incendiary devices all over Europe, including Germany, attacks on Ukrainian embassies, in addition to standard espionage and disinformation. Excellencies, this Council has a responsibility to send a clear message that such provocations will not be tolerated. It must stand in solidarity with Estonia, Romania, Poland, and all nations whose sovereignty is threatened by systemic Russian aggression.
Now, to be fair, the Russian representative did address this earlier today, and he said it was completely made up, like it didn't happen at all, which does contradict the Russian Ministry of Defense that a few days ago said, no, this happened, but it didn't violate the airspace. Also, that airspace isn't Estonian, and we had even other people, commentators and media inside of Russia say, yeah, it happened, and NATO can't do anything about it. So, I don't know. Take your pick. But I think at least all of the NATO member states are in agreement that this violation, you can go with the aircraft in Estonia, or you can go with the 19 drones in Poland. Take your pick. Either one of those are bad. And Sikorski kind of wraps up here by sending a message to the Russian people and the Russian government saying, we know what you're up to here, guys. Here we go.
To the representatives of Russia, I have this to say. We know you don't care for international law and you are incapable of living in peace with your neighbors. Your insane nationalism contains a lust for domination that will not cease until you realize that the age of empires is over and that your empire will not be rebuilt. Every drone strike by the heroes of the armed forces of Ukraine, may God bless them, brings this day closer. Your 3-day special military operation can't even conquer Donbass for 10 years now.
But it wasn't just Poland coming in with these warnings at the United Nations today. We also have Kaja Kallas, the vice president of the European Union, stepping up and saying, hey, look, Russia is not accidentally doing this. We've had all of this time for them to come forward and say, oh, that was a mistake. Here's what happened, guys. But they're not. They're not apologizing. They're not saying what the error was. They're just continuing to try to provoke NATO, the European Union, and really anybody in Ukraine or West into some sort of larger war or a response, and she gets to this in a second, of withdrawing support for Ukraine. Here's Kallas, the vice president of the European Union.
It cannot be that Russia accidentally violates 3 times in 2 weeks European airspace. And if it was accidentally, it was a mistake, there has been plenty of time for Russian Federation to apologize and say, sorry, we made a mistake. Instead, we see a pattern. Russia is testing European borders, probing our resolve, undermining the security of the whole of Europe. Russia will continue to provoke as long as we allow it.
And I think that's a good line, saying Russia is going to keep doing this so long as we allow it to happen. I agree. It's something we've talked about in recent videos. I have made the argument recently that NATO was fully justified to shoot down those 3 Russian aircraft last week. And the international community would have looked at that and said, okay, could be risky, but hey, you can't fly military aircraft into NATO airspace unexpected with transponders off and expect nothing to happen. That, when was the last time NATO aircraft penetrated Russian airspace? I have no idea. Not any time recently. That's not a normal occurrence. And if a NATO aircraft did happen to all of a sudden fly into Russian airspace, it would not be all that shocking if they were shot at or shot down. Kallas is saying here, we're not stupid. We see that this is not happening on accident. She does point to one of the reasons why Russia is doing this in terms of kind of probing the European Union, NATO, and others. And she says one of the goals here is to try to get Ukraine's allies to shift their focus away from Ukraine and at home more domestically. And we're going to hear Putin thinks that exact thing is the best strategy going forward here in a second. But let's wrap up with a second statement here from Kallas.
Russia hopes that it might force us to draw our focus away from supporting Ukraine and focus solely on our own security. Well, let me be very clear. European security starts with Ukraine. And any provocation against EU member states will only strengthen our resolve to support Ukraine.
I think that's a good line, reaffirming that, hey, the security of Europe, and I wish we could drive this home more in the United States, but the security of Europe does not start in Poland. It does not start with NATO. The security of Europe is in Ukraine right now, along the Eastern Front, where they're fighting Russian forces day in and day out. So according to, in this case, the European Union, they are going to continue standing by Ukraine so long as it's needed. Now, shifting over to the foreign minister of Latvia, who spoke on behalf of Latvia and Lithuania, she started with a great line saying, hey, we've got a Russian problem here. Just so everyone's clear, the issue here is that Russia keeps crossing these lines. Here you go.
And Mr. President, let me say, we are not facing a Ukraine crisis. We are faced with Russia crisis. As we speak at this emergency meeting, Russia continues to target and destroy Ukrainian cities, critical civilian infrastructure, kill innocent civilians, medical personnel, children, women, all in pursuit of a land grab. Contrary to the efforts of the President of the United States and European and Ukrainian partners, Russia doesn't seek peace. Russia's imperial and colonial ambitions brutally violate UN Charter. Remember Georgia in 2008, Crimea in 2014, and then the full-scale aggression against Ukraine since 2022.
Now, we'll see if anything actually comes out of this United Nations Security Council meeting. I'm not super optimistic. We haven't seen a lot of progress there in any direction for quite a while. But it is good to see kind of a unified voice being brought forward, especially from Eastern Europe and the Baltic states here. Contrast that with the United States, and we're just, again, kind of shifting in another direction. The president last week said that these attacks might have been a mistake. He was asked later if he was briefed on it, and he said not yet. This is a violation of NATO airspace by Russian military aircraft, and it does not seem to be a top 10 issue for our State Department, our DOD, or the White House. So read into that however you want to. My read is we're just moving in a different direction. My big concern is that we might be sending the wrong message to Russia and to NATO that we are not going to have our allies' backs if push comes to shove. I hope that's not the case. Unfortunately, I do think that is probably how Putin is reading into this. In fact, a new assessment put out a couple days ago by the Institute for the Study of War said, quote, sources stated that Putin assesses that President Trump is unlikely to do much to bolster Ukraine's defense, and that U.S.-Russian talks in Alaska convinced Putin that Trump has no interest in intervening in the war in Ukraine. I agree. I think anybody that watched that summit and the days and the actions that followed in the days and weeks afterwards probably came to the same assessment. I don't think that's new. Shouldn't be a surprise, I guess is the way to put it. We've really just seen that play out since the summit. They say Putin's long-standing theory of victory posits that Russia can militarily defeat Ukraine by indefinitely maintaining the theater-wide initiative and outlasting Western military support for Ukraine. Again, something we've talked about for a long, long time. Ukraine can stay in this fight and can defend itself so long as they have some degree of support from the West. Over time, they have moved further and further away from total dependence on Western munitions, as we've seen an incredible standing up of their domestic weapons industry, especially in the drone arena. But it becomes much, much harder for Ukraine to sustain this fight if all Western support is shut off. And what Putin is watching is the United States walking back further and further. In fact, in today's video, we're going to talk about how the United States is pausing arms sales to some of our European allies. Again, kind of playing right into what Putin believes is the best way for him to achieve victory in Ukraine. The ISW report continues by saying Putin's recent actions, including the decision to redeploy more forces to Donetsk and recent Russian incursions into NATO airspace, further underscores his commitment to both continued military aggression against Ukraine and future military aggression against NATO member states. Again, my view here is that Putin is testing the alliance to see, are we fractured? Will we stand side by side with our NATO allies? I don't know. Again, we have these weekly roll-up videos put together by NATO and the State Department and the DoD, I think sometimes in lieu of actual press conferences. But I went through all of those again this week, and this violation of NATO airspace was not mentioned in any of them. So it's not a top priority. There's so many other things that get called out and get media attention and attention from the secretaries and the ambassador at NATO above this issue. The U.S. mission to NATO did put out a statement on X where they said, we strongly condemn Russia's violation of Estonia's airspace. We stand firmly with our Estonian allies and resolutely defend all NATO territory. Great words. Would love to see those from the Secretary of State, the President, the Vice President, the Secretary of Defense, anyone like that, a little higher up the chain. We're not. And my guess is that Putin is recognizing that pretty quickly. Now, Russian Mill Blogger here, their kind of assessment of how this whole thing is playing out, they're saying, Russia says one thing, Ukraine or Estonia says another. He calls it a draw. We don't need Estonia at all, at least for now. In general, we're good. Estonians are assholes. But of course, we need to be more careful. Times are tough nowadays. So we don't need Estonia yet, is the Russian Mill Blogger take of this most recent incident. Now, in talking about the U.S. shifting focus to other areas of the world, we've definitely seen an increase in South America and our hemisphere focused in and around Venezuela. I think we've carried out 4 drone strikes just in the last couple weeks against cartel boats in the Caribbean. Clearly a focus there, but we are starting to see what I thought was going to happen, because it passes the common sense test, was we might stop donating weapons to Ukraine and giving military aid, but we might start just putting things up for sale, saying, Europe, you do it, we'll sell it. And we started to see a shift in that direction in the last few months, which is why this report that the U.S. is quietly pausing some arms sales to Europe is frustrating and unexpected. Again, I have thought for a while that ideologies aside, that the opportunity to make more money and stand up more jobs in the United States defense industry would have been a favorable move for the Trump administration, but it's hard to make sense of this most recent policy here. So this is an article just came out a couple days ago where they say, as part of the America First agenda, the Department of Defense is stockpiling weapons. Then on a call earlier this month with the State Department, Assistant Secretary of Defense Colby said he did not believe in the value of certain foreign military sales. He added that he didn't like the idea of selling Patriots, which can intercept incoming missiles, to Denmark because they are in short supply and should be reserved for the United States to use as needed. The change would mean the loss of billions of dollars of government and private revenue, reducing the number of jobs in the defense industry, limiting product expansion, and curtailing research and development. Now, an important note here is they said it looks like this is the beginning. It's not clear what weapon sales are going to be turned off, but this has been a long-standing arm of U.S. foreign policy. And it's, I would argue, been pretty effective. We've pulled a lot of allies into the fold, and it's tightened military cooperation and security assistance around the world for a long time. And on top of that, even if you take that piece out of it, provides a lot of jobs and a lot of revenue coming here to workers and companies in the United States. Now, one argument being made is, well, we need more of those. But it seems like the contracts are being turned off too. So the ones that were going to go to Denmark, we're just not going to make those anymore. So the contracts have not changed here in the United States. There's still the set number being ordered by the DoD. It's not like we're turning off Denmark and ramping up the United States. We're just turning off Denmark. Now, one statement I have heard floated out there, I don't know if this is true or not, is that Denmark did not want this purchase anymore, that they've grown weary of this close of ties with their military to the U.S. and walked away from this purchase. I don't know. I could see that sentiment in Denmark, no doubt. I don't know if that actually made it into the decision-making process here. But they say ultimately Denmark signed a $9.1 billion deal last week to buy long-range air defense systems made by a joint French-Italian venture and medium-range systems from Norway, Germany, or France, Denmark's largest ever purchase of arms. That's frustrating. That's frustrating that we're not there for so many different reasons to provide that weaponry. I don't know how long it's been at this point where I've just ranted and raved that if we don't have enough of some of these weapon systems, maybe we make more of those weapon systems. And I know it's not easy, and I know it's complicated, and I know it's expensive, but we've been talking about a shortage of Patriots for like 2.5 years now. More, maybe? How about artillery shells? Running short of artillery shells. Yes, we are standing up some additional production facilities. To be blunt, it is embarrassing that in the United States, we can't turn that switch to create more weapons. More Patriots for everyone. These are defensive weapons. They intercept incoming missiles. More of them would be great. We want more of them. We want our stockpiles overflowing with these Patriots. There's countries around the world that are trying to buy these things up. They can't get enough. It's so frustrating that we are sitting here and we can't find a way to meet that supply. There are so many benefits to the United States producing and exporting more of these weapon systems, the Patriots specifically, and we're not. And this is not a Trump thing, a Biden thing, a Republican, a Democrat thing. This has been going on for multiple administrations. We just cannot, whether it's regulation, whether it's investment, or the issues with foreign military sales, I don't know. But it is embarrassing that there's this very clear need around the world that we are just not meeting. We should, for so many different reasons. But either way, it is nice to see our European allies continuing to step up, take the threat of Russian aggression head on, because from my point of view, it does look like the United States is shifting further and further from any focus on the European theater of operations. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.